Greetings to everyone. We are here at our second session of Robert's Rules in Action. And in this section, we're going to do something that I've never really quite done to this extent before. Today's topic is mastering being a member of the Assembly. So this is really focusing today on the perspective of an individual who is entitled with the proper credentials to be attending a meeting as a member of the Assembly. And the meeting is being run by a presiding officer. And from that perspective, what is our rights? What is our responsibilities as a participant? Now, it's always appropriate to do a little review as to the way things should be working. And not all of us have ever had a completely positive experience as a participant. I know for myself, there have been many times I'm biting my tongue, and I know that the process is not quite right, but it's not necessarily tromping on my rights as an individual, as a member. And remember that there's a bit of a process that's involved. And so when we talk about the parliamentary process, it's really important for us to put several things into perspective. One, that absent members have rights. All members have the right to free and fair debate. All members have the right to know the meaning and the possible significance of a proposed motion. So this is a good place to start. If I'm a member on the floor and there's something going on I don't understand, because there's individuals involving in technical conversations, and we're leading up to a situation where we're being asked to vote or participate in a debate, there's nothing wrong to raise your hand, be recognized by the chair. Mr. or Madam Chair, I'm confused what we're talking about. What are we talking about? And of course, from the perspective of the chair, who is the traffic cop for a meeting, that's a very powerful signal that, you know, the conversation, the interaction that's going on is going on in such a way that if there's one person in the assembly that doesn't understand what's going on, that's probably something that's affecting most of the assembly. And so it's very, very important that all members understand the meaning of and the possible significance of a matter that's under discussion. When it comes to voting, depending on the way the bylaws are set up, each count is voted equally. Parliamentary procedures call for the majority to have the right to make a decision, and calls for the right of the minority to be protected, to be free to speak to their side of the issue. And most importantly, there needs to be a balance where there's a mutual shared duty for the meeting leader, as well as the members of the assembly, to actively participate in the parliamentary process. If you have a well-informed chair, presiding officer, who has full grasp and knowledge of parliamentary process, and they're working with an assembly of individuals that just don't understand really how the process works, that's not a healthy situation. Equally challenging is a situation where members of the assembly have good working knowledge of parliamentary process, and you have a person who's serving in the capacity of a chair, a presiding officer, who really doesn't understand their role that effectively. Both those lead to potentially not great outcomes. But the best practice is when both the leader of the meeting as well as those participating in it have a shared working knowledge of parliamentary process. Now, I received an inquiry recently which really made me pause to think, something that I intuitively understand, but I really want to spend a little bit of time talking about today, because in the mind of the individual that's sitting in the assembly, things may be going on that you just don't understand. And let's just review what is happening in terms of the dynamic of a meeting. First, in every organization, well, I shouldn't say every, but in many organizations, there'll be a set of rules written down, which we may refer to as bylaws. We may refer to them as the Constitution. We may refer to them as the Articles of Incorporation. These are different words for essentially the same documents. And the organization has enacted these bylaws, and the bylaws set out things like how often meetings are held, what are requirements for sending out notice in terms of the time ahead of time that you send out a notice. These types of issues are dealt with in the bylaws. If the organization doesn't have bylaws, then there's a secondary way we can cope with that. But it's really quite important that the presiding officer and the members of the assembly at least have a working knowledge of the bylaws. If they don't have a working knowledge of the bylaws, at least that they come to the meeting with the bylaws in hand so they can refer to them. And in many of these documents, which we can refer to as, for the sake of this session, bylaws, there'll be a designation of the way that meetings are conducted. And in many cases, the bylaws will specifically say that meetings will be run according to the protocols set out in Robert's Rules of Order. Now, let's be clear. Roberts is just one of many systems. Now, in North America, they're quite well recognized and quite often cited. But they're not the only one. There's a system called Gibson's, and in Canada, there's a system that's quite commonly used called Kerr and King. Kerr and King is interesting because it's built on the foundation of Robert's Rules of Order and does certain things in a more specific fashion, and we can learn some lessons from the Kerr and King system. And I have encountered many quasi-government organizations in Canada that will cite Kerr and King. So really need to go to the bylaws first to get an appreciation of how our organization runs. Now, in terms of the perspective of Toastmasters, Toastmasters clubs, Toastmaster areas, Toastmaster districts, you notice I didn't say divisions because divisions actually don't exist in our system. They're an administrative function. The rules that are cited in our constitutions is Robert's Rules of Order. So that's why we were focusing on them in our discussions today. But you need to go to the bylaws first to determine where and what set of rules are to be used. And let us say that you do have bylaws and the bylaws do cite Robert's Rules of Order, then fair enough. But then there's something that's in addition that is very complicated, creates an enormous amount of confusion. And that is the concept of standing rules. Now, standing rules are difficult because in many organizations, they're known by some people, but they're not written down, which as a parliamentarian, I don't like this at all. And if there are standing rules, and I encounter standing rules, I really, in my report to the organization after a meeting is done where I've been serving as a parliamentary officer, I really cite the fact that standing rules need to be written down and circulated to those who are attending the meeting. Now, what is a standing rule? A standing rule is, in its best practice mode, is a motion that has been passed by the group in the past as a way to conduct meetings. For example, a good use of a standing rule is that if you're making a motion and the motion is more than 5 words long, that you need to write out the motion in advance. And then when you make the motion and it's seconded, that you pass the written copy of the motion to the secretary. Well, that's just a useful, helpful thing. Helps the secretary to accurately capture the essence of your motion for the minutes. And that's not a bad idea. There are times in which there may be limitations on the conduct of members in that they're restricted to a certain amount of time that they can speak. And what makes standing rules even a little more complicated, because they're not necessarily written down, is that best practice is that they're created by passage of main motions, but there are times that some standing rules are just imposed and created by the chair as a decision of the chair. Now, we learned in our first session, a presiding officer, well, they can use some latitude. In many ways, they could do anything they want, but they're limited because they're operating at the leisure of the floor. And if they make a decision that a member of the floor doesn't like, the member has the right to create a motion to appeal the decision of the chair, or we call challenge the chair. And of course, if that motion is passed, whatever decision the chair has made is reversed. So the chair doesn't want to risk that if they can avoid it. The presiding officer really wants to maintain the respect of the floor, does not want to have challenges made to their decisions. That that's to be avoided, because they're a traffic cop. They're directing traffic. That's their job, and they want to do it in an unbiased way. Now, sometimes chair people are not unbiased. Sometimes they're very biased. You see this a lot in the House of Commons, for example, here in Canada. And as a result of that, there is a strong potential for them to be stepping on the rights of the individual members of the floor. And in these circumstances, members of the floor need to assert their rights back to the chair. We'll examine that a little bit later. So best practice is that for a standing rule, once it's created, and it's best created by a motion passed by the floor, that there should be a running record, a running list, a report, if you will, that lists the limitations that may be imposed by the organization upon itself to manage itself better through the use of standing rules. So that's a really important distinction. Recently, I had a question that talked about, well, in the first session, Mr. Edge, you said that, you should politically consider preambling to a motion, but I've been in many meetings and there's no preambles allowed. And the question I have to ask immediately is, well, let's examine the circumstances. Is that because there's a standing rule in place? Or was it a decision imposed by the chair? If it's a decision imposed by the chair, that decision can be challenged. Technically, once the chair recognizes a member, control passes from the chair to the member. The member controls the floor. Unless there's any limitations on how long they can speak, they control the floor, and they can speak as long as they want. And there's nothing wrong with taking their time to explain why they're making a motion in a preamble, unless there's a limitation that's been historically placed in the organization in the form of a standing rule, which may exist. When you look at places like the House of Commons or Congress, you will see that there's lots of standing rules that get interplayed and intermixed with parliamentary process. And it becomes very fascinating to separate the two when you become more progressively skilled as a parliamentarian. Now, there's some important definitions, really important from the perspective of a member. For example, often we're at a meeting, and if we have the bylaws in front of us, and we know that quorum is 50% of the voting members of an organization, and you're in the room and you see that there's only 5 people present, well, has quorum been established as required by the bylaws? And there's nothing wrong with putting your hand up, waiting to be recognized by the chair. Point of information, Mr. and Madam Chair, do we have quorum to legally conduct business? Because under the bylaws, we need 50% of voting members. Section, and you can cite the section. I don't believe we have that. Do we have that? And so it's, again, a very important distinction, because there's nothing to stop open discussion taking place in a meeting. And there's nothing wrong with having a matter that you can't deal with today put onto the agenda of the next meeting, which means it'll be on the notice for the meeting and people can deal with it at that time. But you need quorum to legally conduct business. And when there's money involved, this becomes particularly an important matter. I think we are comfortable now with the concept of bylaws, and we're getting more and more comfortable with this red herring standing rules that may exist for an organization. So let's just, again, review very quickly the process that takes place between the presiding officer and a member of the floor. First, the presiding officer will recognize a member of the floor. Once the member is recognized, control passes from the presiding officer to the individual to have the floor. So they receive recognition, and as a member of the floor, I have the right to make a proposal in the form of a main motion, what we call a main motion. There's a reason why we call it that. And I may elect to have a preamble. I may just elect to make the motion. And then I pass control back to the presiding officer, who calls for a seconder. Seconder means that there must be at least one other person in the room. Of course, I, as a member of the assembly, if I've been doing my homework, I'll make sure that I have the support of at least one or two others that will agree to second my motion. So there will be at least two people in the room that will speak and want to speak to the proposal. Once the motion is seconded, the presiding officer places the motion before the assembly and opens formal debate. Now, a traffic cop will, by definition, will allow traffic one way and stop, allow traffic another way, stop. And that really is the model that a presiding officer follows. And so the presiding officer, if they're really trying to get alternate debate taking place, will say, I will now call upon the person who made the motion to speak on behalf of it. Obviously, they've made the motion, so they'll be in support of it. So that person can stand up and speak to why they think the motion should be passed. And then the traffic cop may choose to say, is there anyone that wants to speak against the motion? Now, it's a bit of a lobbying aspect by the presiding officer, but what they're trying to do is alternate between positive and negative debate. So everyone has this goes to the principle of free and open debate, where all sides are heard, including the minority. So that's the principle that the presiding officer is supposed to be upholding. There'll come a point where the presiding officer will say, we're ready for the debate. Of course, a member in the assembly, if they see debate going back and forth, everyone's repeating themselves, and I'm in this category, I'll stand up and be recognized. Call the question, Mr. Chair. I've heard everything I need to hear. Call the question. And then the presiding officer has a decision. Do they allow the debate to take place? Or do they proceed to vote? And sometimes I'll watch a presiding officer. No, I'll keep debate going, and I'll be a little quiet as a member of the assembly. And and if I hear everyone repeating themselves again, I'll wait for recognition. The chair knows what I'm going to do at this stage. Yes, Mr. Ed. I call for the question, and I appreciate you calling for a seconder, and let's vote on calling the question. So it's a little push back to the presiding officer. You made a decision to let you away with it, but I'm pushing you back, saying, we're just repeating the same information. You're wasting everyone's time. Let's call for the vote. And I, as a member of the assembly, have the right to push that way. I'm not saying I'm voting for or against the motion. I'm just pushing for it. Let's vote. We have all the information we need. Everyone's repeating themselves. We're wasting time. And I've been at meetings where people accuse me, call the question. You're the guy. I said, I'm the guy every time. Every time. People start laughing at me because they know when I put my hand up, and call them the question, because I can't stand repeat, like if you're giving me fresh new information, one side is really engaged in a proper debate, fair enough. I'll let you go as long as you want. But the second I see you repeating yourself, I'm going to jump in. Okay, so we proceed to the vote. Vote is counted. Presiding officer declares the result, then turns to the secretary and instructs them how to record the result. So I think this speaks for itself. Mr. Chair, I second the motion. Now, the next part where a member of the assembly has the right to participate is that maybe there's a motion that's been made and you say to yourself, that's not bad. I support it mostly, but it could be a little bit better. Rise to receive the attention of the presiding officer. I stand up and I make a motion to amend. Now, in this is a lot of controversy. And most times where people get confused what's going on is when there's a motion, motions to amend. And the problem takes place when there's a main motion, someone makes a motion to amend the wording of the main motion, and then there's a motion to amend the amendment, and then there's and when you get beyond 3 layers of amendments, the entire assembly is confused what's going on. And the presiding officer is really challenged to explain to everyone what's going on. And it needs a strong presiding officer to deal with the last amendment first, because people will raise to be recognized and will be debating the main motion. No, we're not talking about the main motion. You have to shut them down and proceed to where we're talking. We're talking about the word or words that are being used right now in the motion to amend. One controversy that takes place is that people say you cannot change the meanings of the motion. And I don't know what they're talking about, because there's nothing in Robert's rules that says that. You can change the wording, which means you can make an amendment that has the effect of changing the entire meaning of the main motion. If the motion to amend passes, the main motion is changed and we'll be voting on it in its changed format. It doesn't matter that it's completely opposite to what the intended meaning of the motion is. So some people who have funny personalities that like to cause a little bit of havoc sometimes will introduce the word not in a motion that changes its meaning entirely. And there's technically nothing wrong with doing that. If there's a seconder for the amendment, it's fully debated and it's voted upon and the majority passed the motion to amend, then it changes the main motion into its new format, which may mean that the motion has an entirely new meaning. There's nothing wrong with that. So as the chair should really not be welcoming amendments beyond 3 layers of complexity. They have to do a lot of explaining to everyone. Members of the assembly, if they're confused at any stage, should be asking the chair for clarification what's going on. That's their right. And in this whole process, one method that I like to use to help it is if I see that the amendments are minor as a presiding officer, I reserve the right to go back to the main mover of the main motion and say, can we just withdraw everything and put a fresh new motion? Can you make a fresh new motion that incorporates all this stuff? And the majority of the time, the person who's made the main motion is very, very agreeable to this. Now, one has to be careful as a presiding officer, because you have to go back to the person who made the amendment and their seconder, and you have to get them both to agree to withdraw their amendment. Then you have to go to the next layer of amendment, the mover and the seconder, and get their consent, and go back to the main motion and get the consent of the mover and the seconder. And if everyone is agreed, then the motion is completely withdrawn off the floor. Then I'll turn to the main mover and say, can you now put in a new motion with fresh language? And they will put a motion that incorporates all the things that people were wanting. Go to the seconder, do you consent? Yes. is an open debate, and hopefully there'll be no more motions to amend. And that's a very practical way of solving this problem. But remember, as a member of the assembly, if you don't understand what's being talked about, raise your hand for attention, be recognized by the chair. Point of information, can you please explain to me what we're talking about? Because I'm confused. What are we doing? And that's a powerful signal to the chair that things are getting out of hand very fast, and no one's following what's being said. And as a presiding officer, they have a job to almost be like an auctioneer. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a motion on the floor. The motion's been seconded. The motion is, but we are changing the word, in this case, silly, to very silly. We're just discussing today the word very. I'm going to ask the person who's proposed the amendment to add the word very to speak for it. And I'll start speaking. No, I'm not. I didn't ask you to speak to the main motion. That'll be later. Please speak to the word very. Why does the word very need to be added? And then anyone against the word very? Okay, ready for a vote? Let's vote only on the amendment. The word very. That's all we're going to be amending. So we're going to change silly to very silly. So the traffic cop, the presiding officer, needs to keep everyone informed every step of the way. And if you as a member of the assembly don't understand what's going on, you need to get the attention of the chair and just ask them, please explain what's going on. I don't understand. I don't understand what I'm voting for. Tools that are available to members is that sometimes you're sitting in a room, and this is especially true in places like condominiums. You know, there's a rule in condominiums. I used to be a property manager, and there's the 3 Ps: pets, people, and parking. Get rid of those things in the condominium, there's no problems. And of course, usually there's problems relating to pets, and pets take on an emotional characteristic for people. People get very emotionally engaged in a discussion about whether or not there should be pets or not in a condominium. So you may be sitting as a member of the floor, there may be an issue that's being debated. Everyone's very passionate about it. You have individuals that don't want pets in the building. You have individuals that pets are like family to them. And this is going back and forth. And what are you going to do? You're going to sit through this whole meeting where everyone's getting more and more distressed. One thing that's available to you as a member of the floor is to be raise your hand, be recognized, and then make a motion to refer the matter to a committee, bylaws committee, animal control committee, an animal friendly committee, whatever you want to create as a committee. But basically what you're doing is, we're not really prepared to discuss this issue today. We don't have enough information. There's high emotions involved. Let's send it to a committee to be studied and brought back as a report in some future date. Favorite tool of governments. Kick the issue into the future. Don't deal with it today. You know, form a commission, form a committee, you know, just to study the issue and come back with a report that we may or may not think about. So that's a tool that's available to the individual member on the floor. Of course, there's a motion to postpone. You know, maybe it's a financial matter. You know, let's postpone this until the budget is passed. And of course, there's the ever popular tool to postpone indefinitely, which means the issue, it goes away. Bye-bye. It's postponed indefinitely. Never comes back. Bye-bye. Great tool. No one wins. No one loses. Just goes away. So there's that tool that's available to a member. And of course, a very, very powerful tool that the member has is a motion to adjourn. Because if it's seconded, passed, meeting's over. And there are times in which things are very highly emotionally charged. The organization, you know, really isn't going to win with this debate because there's 2 factions, you know, something similar to what you're seeing in the United States, where there's like 49% of the population in one camp and the other, and things aren't terribly functional. So motion to adjourn is in the toolbox of individuals who are standing as members of the assembly who can have an impact on what happens. Call a question, my favorite tool. This is just a nudge to the chair. Let's vote. I think we've talked about this enough. And I'm a big proponent of calling the question. People laugh at me, but if I've heard the debate, I've heard all I need to hear to make a decision, let's vote. Let's not waste time. So we should just understand that from a main motion, there is a distinction of things that are called subsidiary motions. Amendment falls in this category. Call the question falls in this category, was sometimes called the previous question. Table the motion, to lay on the table, to put it aside pending. And when you make a motion to postpone, you can do it to an event, you can do it to a time, or you can do it indefinitely. All those are choices that are available to you as a member if you're making this type of motion. Refer to committee and a motion to limit or extend debate. Maybe you have a 5-minute timeline and you want more time to talk about something. There's nothing wrong with making a motion to extend debate further. And you see this many times. There are things which are called privilege motions that are available to an individual member of the assembly. Orders of the day, you raise your hand to be recognized by the chair, you stand. Calling orders of the day, which means if the agenda that we adopted has timelines along assigned to each issue, you're telling the chair they have to jump to where the agenda says we're supposed to be at. And there really is no decision, no latitude for the chair. They have to respond to your orders of the day. Yeah, that's right. It's 3 o'clock. We should be at this issue. I'm now going to move to that issue, which means whatever's being debated on right now, I'll have to go on to the next agenda for the next meeting. Now, one very poorly understood, and I've seldom seen this used in the world of Toastmasters, is a question of privilege. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And that doesn't mean that it cannot be used as a tactical tool by a member of the assembly. Question of privilege is a matter of high importance, where the rights of an individual member are being stomped on. Now, it could be as simple as the room is cold, we need to have the heating turned up. Or it could be much more profound. We'll examine this further. Meeting to recess means that let's stop the meeting temporarily to have a little private set of meetings. It can be very helpful in different examples. And of course, in the privileged motions category is a motion to adjourn or fix a time to adjourn, which is again another very clever tool. If you make a motion to fix the time for adjournment at the beginning of the meeting, then when the clock is ticking, and when it hits 9 o'clock, meeting's over. Mr. Chair, the meeting's over. We're adjourned. Point of order, right? So it can be a very useful tool. Incidental motions include a point of order where it's a little friendly nudge from a member of the floor. Mr. Chair, point of order, we're supposed to only enact business when there's quorum. Do we have quorum? So you're nudging the chair. You're being polite, and it's in your right to call the presiding officer's attention to a certain technical matter. Point of information is where you have some information. You're not making any, you're not taking any position on a matter. You're not voting for it or against it, but you're providing information that will be useful to everyone to make a decision. For example, Mr. Chair, point of information, we passed a motion that the budget cannot exceed 10%. This was made several years ago. Check the records, we can't exceed 10%, point of information. So if you're debating an issue where the budget is being increased by 15%, then by drawing to everyone's attention to this germane information, maybe it'll change the way the debate takes place. Of course, under incidental motions, we have a motion to appeal the decision of the chair, sometimes called challenge the chair. And when money is involved and there's a particularly strong presiding officer, there may be a need for an individual member of the floor to challenge decisions that they render. Now, there's another tool that, again, I've very seldom seen used. I've only seen it once, and that's objection to the consideration of a question. And this is where you're listening as a member of the assembly and you see someone making a motion, and the presiding officer is calling for the seconder, and you raise your hand and you make an objection to the consideration of the question. Not only you're not seconding it, you're asking for the main motion to be quashed. And if there's a seconder for your motion and it passes, then the matter can't be considered. It takes a really slick timing, but it is a tool that's available to a member of the assembly. So our chart of motions are always helpful to us. They also help the presiding officer when deciding when dealing with matters. Notice that the question of privilege is ranked very high. Closed debate, which is, call the question, means let's vote, is 7. So pretty high ranking. The original main motion is in the middle here. This black line shows you where it sits. And a decision to challenge the chair, very interesting, okay, because it is outclassed by a point of order. And you'll see what I'm talking about in a minute or so. So these are important things to consider. Having one of these charts in front of you can be very helpful. And if you want to, later on when we go question period, I can put one of these documents into the chat so you can download it. But having one of these charts with you at all times can be very, very helpful. All right. Now I'm trying to do something technically I've never done before. I hope it works. I have as a hobby, and I have many hobbies, but one of my new hobbies is that I'm following the conduct of the House of Commons, especially the standing committees, which make great use of parliamentary process. And here is an example of instances, where you can see members asserting their rights. And in this case, this is going to be focusing on points of order.
Cancellation of the impact of the cancellation of that program. And if so, will you table it with the committee?
Thank you, Mr. Julian. That question may have to wait for another round. We're moving to the Conservatives.
So the chairman is cut off
for 5
individual.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Mr. Julian.
You're very distinguished following the footsteps of Wayne Easter.
Point of order.
Wayne Easter always allowed the questions to be answered.
Mr. Julian, we had already breached the 6-minute mark, and for an answer to be answered,
Chair's making a decision.
Well into 7 minutes. So
all they have to do is say yes or no, and that they'll share that with the committee. That's a very brief answer.
So, Mr. Julian, well, it didn't sound like the answer was going to be so brief. So, Mr. Julian,
you don't know until you try.
Another member is stepping in.
It's all about fairness here and being fair with our time for everybody. So we're moving to Mr. Chambers for 5 minutes. Point of order.
I think
Point of order.
Julian's request is entirely reasonable. Mr. Easter, would you normally allow just a few seconds to try and get an answer
Polyev,
at the end?
So the meetings are being conducted in a fair way. I've been tracking time as efficiently as possible. And
Chair's making a decision.
All members get their fair amount of time. So, Mr. Julian,
point of order.
When it came
Point of order.
Yes,
Mr. Polyev, when it came to Mr. Julian's
Mr. Julian's not
request,
looking for any more time.
We already moved past the 6-minute mark.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're moving to Mr. Chambers now for 5 minutes.
Point of order, Mr.
Point of order.
Point of order.
It's a very simple request, a very simple answer. We've already taken more time on points of order than it would have taken simply to ask the officials, are there studies? Can you share it? That's the essence of my question. I would like to have a response, please.
I don't know if our witnesses have a yes or no for you.
Give them a chance to.
Yeah,
if you'd let them
Mr.
speak.
Julian, but we are sticking, and you'll have an opportunity to get that answer in the next round. So we're moving to Mr. Chambers for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, with respect, I'll have to challenge that decision.
Challenge of the chair.
So, Mr. Julian, it is about fairness and based on the answers that we have received from witnesses.
Chair, you've been challenged.
Yeah.
Put it to a vote.
put it
There you
to-
go.
That's how it works. It's not a debatable motion. You've been
Wow.
challenged.
And House of Commons, not debatable. Robert's Rules of Order, it is debatable, but the challenge to the chair has been made. You can see the chair is conferring with his parliamentarian assistant.
So the question is, shall the decision of the chair be sustained? If you were in agreement with the chair, you vote yes. If you are against the chair's ruling,
They're
you vote
proceeding to a vote to challenge the chair. Wow. By the way, this C2 bill is $2 billion worth of spending. So it's a major piece of legislation.
Not to allow the witness to answer because we did go over time, and we would be well over time.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Could
Mr.
we just
Beach.
get clarification from the clerk on whether or not time allocation is a challengeable ruling?
every chair's ruling is challengeable, and I believe in
Every
Okay.
chair's ruling is challengeable.
every ruling by the chair is challengeable, and in this case, the chair ruled on the conduct of the committee, so it would be appropriate to challenge. We are ready to move to the
Clarification, does it mean that we have more than the time allowed to speak? If that ruling is accepted, that means we have more than the time allowed.
So this is a member
to
who doesn't know
question.
exactly the implications of what's being talked about and is asking for
order.
clarification.
Hope this isn't cutting into my time.
Chair is conferring with their assistant. And in that is the role of a parliamentarian, by the way, in Robert's rules.
And it is up to the committee. But yeah, we would be going, we may find ourselves with, if.
Point of
this-
order,
if
Mr.
this-
Chair.
if we
Point of
might
order.
find ourselves
Point of
with
order,
the-
Mr.
no,
Chair. Point of order.
Monsieur Pellier, I'm just trying to bring a.
Point of
a
order, Mr. Chair.
clarification,
I have a point of
understanding.
order.
Yes.
Yeah, you're,
First I got, yeah, Madame Chatel, so it would mean that we can go well over the 6 minutes
no,
or 5 minutes.
no,
or-
no, stop misleading the committee.
No,
Point of order.
that's.
Actually,
no,
I have a point of
I
order.
have conferred with the clerk. And this
Sorry, you
is-
have the obligation to recognize points of order rather than giving speeches. Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Pellier.
Your decision to prevent the witness from answering the question has been challenged. That is a non-debatable challenge. If the challenge succeeds and your decision is overturned, then the witness will be given a chance to answer the question. That's what we're voting on. Stop trying to manipulate the debate and
Mr.
get to the vote.
So that's in the wow category. The discussion that has taken place is all about the individual rights of the members of the group, this committee, the assembly. And they're asserting their rights using the chart of motions. And what was being talked about is a point of order. Point of order stands priority 14. There was a challenge to the chair. And what happened was the chairperson kept making decisions that led to more challenges. And the member kept two different members from two different perspectives were both raising points of order. And in one case, a person was just wanting a simple question answered. That could have been done in a few seconds, but because the decision of the chair was to cut them off, it carried on for what you saw, nearly 5 or 10 minutes. going through some procedural issues over whether or not the question has been answered. So here's where individual members are asserting their rights, and you can certainly sense the presiding officer doesn't necessarily have the respect of the floor. And so in such circumstances, this is when parliamentary process really shines. Now I have another presentation here on a question of privilege. We'll see if I can get this one going as well. This is one that I previously did with Laura Wingard of our club, in which we focused on the issue of a question of privilege. Welcome to today's podcast, the 8th in a series, Robert's Rules of Order. And today we're going to be focusing on a question of privilege. My name is Randall Edge, and please welcome my co-host today, able parliamentarian Laura Wingard. And Laurel, tell me, what is a question of privilege?
Question of privilege is when you feel during the meeting that your rights are being violated and you need to address that situation.
And in the chart of motions, in terms of ranking, what is the placement of this tactical tool, question of privilege?
4.
Wow, so it's ranked high.
Very high.
And correct me if I'm wrong, if I look at this chart, you have the right to interrupt the speaker.
That is correct.
So you don't
It's
have
so
to
high.
wait. You don't have to wait until you're being recognized. You don't have to raise your hand. You can jump in.
Because it's your privilege.
It's your
and
privilege. So in parliamentary process, the chart says here to request a personal privilege. And in terms of the book, because of course that's our Bible. What does the book say? The book says questions relating to the rights and privileges of the assembly or to its members of the assembly take precedence of all other motions except the 3 preceding, which is adjournment, recess, and which to yield. Okay, so what would we use this for? What kinds of things would be a question of privilege? The room's too hot, would that be a question of privilege?
That could be.
Okay.
Because
All
you're
right.
not able to concentrate on the proceedings at hand because you're too hot.
Okay. Now, today we have something a little bit special. We're about to go into share mode. You're not going to be seeing us, as you're going to be, you're hearing us in the background. We're going to stop motion every now and then, and we're going to add some colorful commentary between the two of us. And aren't we, Laurel?
Yeah, we're trying.
Okay, very good. Now, this is quite extraordinary because it's not every day you encounter questions of privilege. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say. I don't think it happens very often at all. That's why this one makes it so unique. I've watched it a couple of times now, and I'll probably watch it again. I absolutely think it's a very fascinating, clip.
Well, it's from the public record. It's from the
Yep.
Canadian House of Commons. It's from a subcommittee that's working in the House of Commons. The timeline is February of 2021. This committee, just a little bit of background, have been working using, video conferencing, specifically Zoom. This is their 5th hour of operation as a committee. We have an interesting set of characters. Is that fair to say, an interesting set of characters?
At this point, I'd have to say they were an interesting set of characters.
Covering coast to coast. We have people from British Columbia, people from Quebec, people from Alberta. We have a huge, interesting cross-section of people.
And they're trying to get work accomplished.
Right. And we should really clearly state that the House of Commons, because it's been operating for a long time, more than 100 years, it has developed a complex set of standing rules. And we're going to be looking at what is happening, not from the perspective
a parliamentary process in the Canadian House of Commons. We're looking at it from a perspective of Robert's rules. How would Robert's rules apply to the circumstances that we're witnessing? Now, having said that, Robert's rules was based on a foundation, a parliamentary process in the UK, as well as France, as well as the US Congress. And so as a result of that, it has a heritage that directly relates to the issues that we're going to be witnessing in this situation. So I'm going to now share our screen. Okay, and what we have before us is the chairman, is a fellow by the name of Ron McKinnon. Again, this is a matter of the public record. And so we're going to just play this, and from time to time, we're going to stop it.
No room. So
Point of privilege, Chair.
Mr.
Point of privilege, Chair.
Very quickly.
Point of privilege, Chair. You have just stated that you intend to either suspend or attempt to adjourn this committee meeting based on resources. Now, I do realize that we are committing or we are undertaking this meeting from a virtual perspective. But I believe that democracy has to proceed regardless, and it is actually incumbent upon the House of Commons to ensure that we do have resources for situations like this. It is clear that the Liberals are filibustering this motion. I don't believe that they should be given a window, a convenient window to stop this the debate on this motion because of an excuse of quote unquote resources. The House of Commons, whoever it should be, the Speaker's office, your office, whatever, should be attempting to find resources rather than shut down the committee because of a
The
quote,
resources
lack of
that
resources.
is being talked about
My
is a
privilege as a
translator.
parliamentarian is being violated by your decision to attempt to shut down committee with regard to this. I submit this as a formal point of privilege, and I do not accept your attempt to shut down this committee due to quote unquote resources. Find them.
Well, I'm going to stop right there. Wow. What is happening here? What is this individual member of the committee, this MP, Michelle Rempel, what is she trying to do, Laurel?
Well, what we didn't see at the beginning of this is the chairperson unilaterally decided that it was time to shut the meeting down before their work was being done because there was no resources. She didn't say what type of resources, but whatever resources there were, they couldn't continue the meeting. And she felt that herself was, her rights were being violated because she wanted to continue and get this resolved, whatever motion was on the table.
Now, from a Robert's Rules of Order perspective, there's a few implications here. One implication is that this meeting is not being run by an agenda with a fixed time on it.
No.
So the implications is at the beginning of the meeting, there was not a motion to adopt the agenda, which by definition would have put in place an automatic adjournment of the meeting.
That is
so
correct.
Clearly that didn't take place. They've been working for 5 hours and the chair issued a decision. I'm going to close the meeting because of lack of resources. People are going home apparently. There'll be no translation, no one to take the transcript, no one to do the recording. So he made this decision and she's jumped in. Let's see what happens next.
The same point of order, Mr.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay, I'm going to stop right there. Point of order. Can he do this, Laurel?
Well, if you look at the chart, point of order is number 14, which means that they need to deal with number 4 before they deal with 14.
So let's just see. This member has jumped in under point of order. He can interrupt the speaker. Let's see what the speaker does.
Tremple Garner, who was that next?
On the same point of order, dealing with the member's matter of privilege, I'm wondering if the member is suggesting that if we cannot provide French translation, then we should continue on, because I would strongly advise against that. If we cannot provide French translation, I don't think it would be appropriate to continue. Can she just provide some clarification if she is recommending that we continue, whether or not we can provide translation?
Now, from a Robert's Rules of Order perspective, what did he just do, Laurel?
He added information that already hadn't been introduced.
So that's actually a question of information, a point of information. It's not a point of order. What
That's
ranking is a point of information?
I believe under 14.
It's 16, I believe.
Yeah, 16.
So okay, he can interrupt the speaker. Speaker did recognize him. You know, that we're going to have to watch the activities of this chairperson very carefully to see if he is an impartial, you know, chairperson. Let's just see what happens next.
No, Mr. Chair, on that point of privilege, what I am saying is that it is a failure of the chair and the House of Commons to obtain resources for translation during this meeting. To underscore again, the Liberals, including the government House leader, Mr. Lamoureux, is filibustering this motion. He has not talked about the contracts. It's very clear that the Liberals don't want this motion to pass. The opposition parties are clear that we do. So it is not, House resources should be here to ensure that debate can happen. That includes in both official languages. So my privilege is being violated. The members, every member here's privilege is being violated. Of course, we want proceedings to happen per standing orders with regard to translation, but we're a year into this pandemic. The House of Commons has been proceeding virtually for some time, and I do not accept that my privilege should be violated because they can't find, or you or whoever it is can't find translation. This should be something that is accommodated for. I don't believe that Liberal members of Parliament and the government should be able to abrogate democracy with the excuse that they can't find resources. I mean, if they can't, if the government and the House of Commons can't find resources for a Zoom meeting and translation, how are they going to deliver vaccines for Canadians? Come on. Mr. Chair, I need to finish this. My privilege as a parliamentarian is directly tied to my ability to pass motions or debate motions like this on behalf of my constituents. And the excuse that somehow we don't have resources is not. This is the definition of breach of privilege. This debate must continue. So you need to find resources, Chair. You need to find translators. The clerk should have seen, you should have seen the fact, I'm sure you've been privy to discussions with the center and with other people that this is a filibuster. So this needs to finish. So I assert that my privilege is being breached as a parliamentarian if you decide to suspend or attempt to adjourn this meeting due to, quote, lack of House resources. And I think most Canadians would agree. We are a year into this. The government has prorogued Parliament. It has done everything possible to stop opposition members from getting answers from this government. And now the Liberals can filibuster this all they want. But I don't think that it is fair. It is a breach of my privilege to allow.
So we really have had an opportunity to see firsthand the impacts of parliamentary process in the conduct of a meeting, and that not only are there responsibilities by the presiding officer, but there is also rights given to each member of the Assembly. And there are tools that are available to us as members of the Assembly. The perspective of today's workshop is that these tools are available to you. And often members of the Assembly aren't acting upon the tools that are available to them. And so tools such as refer to committee, point of order, motion to postpone, point of order, and a motion to on a matter of privilege. If we go to the chart of motions, that really is the foundation tool for us as parliamentarians. We can be reminded of and we can make use of these tools. I'll now open the floor to questions. Madam Timer, how are we doing for time?
Mr. Educational Master Parliamentarian, able parliamentarian, we are at 59 minutes and 30 seconds for the educational portion. And as far as the meeting is concerned, we are at 11:15. So we have 15 more minutes in the meeting.
All right. So I open the floor for questions.
Question from Rod Shine.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Randall. Enjoying this. I have a few questions, but my first one goes back to one of your first slides where a seconder is required. If I show up at a meeting and I have a mitt full of proxies, can I raise a motion and use my proxies to second the motion?
Fascinating question. And by definition, a proxy is an instrument, which I haven't really discussed at all about, but I'll discuss it right now. A proxy is a invention that is stated under either bylaws or a main motion that has been passed by the assembly in its history and becomes a standing rule. Usually the proxy form is laid out in a authorized format and represents the rights of the member who is giving the proxy. And depending on the bylaws, depending upon the wording, there can be many forms of proxies. For example, a proxy could be an unlimited proxy if permitted by the bylaws, in which a member passes all of their individual rights to the proxy holder. In some cases, proxies are very specific. They only allow the member to vote. They can't be counted in the bylaws towards quorum, and they can't be counted to the rights of a member. They can only be used for a vote. In Toastmasters, the proxies that we usually use basically empower a specific person with all the rights of the individual member, and this is set out in our Constitution. So it really is a matter of examining the bylaws, examining how proxies are legally constituted. Is the proxy that's involved a fully vested proxy that, where the initial member who's giving the proxy gives the proxy holder full rights? And if the proxy holder has full rights, yes. The answer is absolutely yes. A person can make the motion, and then they can use a proxy on behalf of another member. That other member will be named in the minutes as a seconder. The answer is yes, in the right circumstance. Any other questions?
I have a question that I posted in the chat to you. It's Larry Newhart.
Unfortunately, I don't see the chat right now and doing this presentation, so just pose a question.
Okay, in my copy of Robert's Rules of Order, 9th edition, page 134, it says the following types of amendments are out of order. One that merely makes the adoption of the amended question equivalent to a rejection of the original motion. What is your comment?
Great and insightful comment. I've never seen that used. I have seen motions amended that clearly change their meaning. And I've never seen anyone rise on a point of order to challenge the proceedings. And so I've not experienced firsthand anyone raising that rule, but it's a good point. And probably if you raised your hand on a point of order, depending on the motion that's being handled, it probably would be very carefully examined by the presiding officer. And of course, they're going to have to make a decision whether or not the motion, the amendment is going to be allowed by the chair to proceed. But thank you for the question. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, how do you structure board meetings to make sure introverted members have equal chance to offer views?
Really, the balancing of views is a matter of leadership for the meeting by the presiding officer. A key component of that is setting the agenda. And probably one of the most important issues to be dealt with at the beginning of the meeting is the motion to adopt the agenda. Now, if the agenda is part of notice that's been sent out to the members, there is an obligation that anything that's new has to be placed on the as a notice of motion for the next meeting. But you can change the order of motions, and you certainly can by changing the order in which business is handled, can allow more time at the beginning of the meeting for those issues that would bring balance to all the members. So the agenda is a critical piece of this. And from the perspective of a member of the floor of the assembly, that would be one that would be of high attention from my perspective. You certainly want to make sure that so that the rights of the minority is protected, that those issues that are important to the minority are higher ranked, so they're dealt with during the meeting and not dealt with because you just ran out of time because there was a set time for the meeting and the meeting finishes at its designated adjournment time. So that's, from my perspective, the best way a member from the floor can bring balance to an issue. But certainly from the perspective of the presiding officer, if they're doing their job, parliamentary process is one where the rights of the majority are respected to make a decision, but the rights of the minority are to be heard and be free to speak. And the agenda should be set up in such a way that permits that by the presiding officer. Once the agenda is set, send out a notice. Then from the perspective of the members of the floor of the assembly, changing the order of the agenda is the key issue underway. Or citing that there's something wrong with the agenda and asking formally there's a notice of motion that's placed on the next agenda that brings balance to the issue. Any other questions?
Yes, I had a question for you. Wonder if you could comment. In our meetings, our chair, the presiding officer, has often stated that no one can speak to a motion twice before everyone has had the chance to speak.
They've made a decision. That's a decision of the chair. If they've made a decision, what rights does the members of the assembly have?
Challenge the chair.
They can challenge the chair. They've made a decision, unless there has been in the past a motion passed and duly passed as a seconder, and the majority passed the main motion and becomes part of the standing rules of the organization. The standing rules can be invented one of two ways, either by a motion passed in the history of the organization that becomes a standing rule, or a decision by the chair. The chair can do anything they want, but they risk a motion of appeal, a challenge to the chair. So we have to really pay attention to the decisions that the chair is making. And if you saw that meeting for Committee C2, what I found really fascinating is rapid fire. The chairman kept making decisions, hoping that he'll get away with it. But in almost every case, because he has members of his committee, Mr. Palatov has been in the House of Commons for nearly 15 years, and the other fellow who started the whole discussion, he's been there for over 10 years. They know their way around the House. They know what the rules are, and they assert their rights, as Michelle Rempel did. She's been there, for I think 7 terms now, and so they've learned how the situation works. And when they see rapid fire decisions being made by the chair, they just don't let them go. They stand up for their rights. And so there we are.
I have a question.
Yes.
How do you close down discussion on a tough issue and move it to a vote when people are just repeating what they already said?
That is the previous question, number 7. You make a motion to close debate, which the vernacular that people use, which I use, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, call the question. in which, we've have a call for the vote. Are we ready to vote? Oh, no, I'm going to let debate go on. And I usually let that go once. But if I see the same thing happening over and over again, people are just, because sometimes you get in a situation where people just will not give up their point of view. They have to repeat themselves over and over and over, which is just a big waste of time. We know what the issues are. We know what the views are for the advancement of the motion, what the views are against the motion. As a member, I can call for the question. And if it carries on, I'll raise to be recognized then, and I'll say the chair, I'd like to formally make a motion to call for the vote previous question. I would like to close debate. And then please call for a seconder, like I'm nudging as a member of the assembly, the chair. And if I'll let them go with it once, second time I'm gonna, and if they make a decision, no, I'm gonna carry on, then I will challenge the chair. You made a decision not to proceed with my motion to close debate. I now challenge the chair. And so if that passes, then the decision of the chair is overturned, which means they have to proceed to call for the vote. So there we are.
One more question, if I may.
Sure.
Call for the orders of the day.
Yes.
Could that be overruled with a motion and a vote from the assembly?
Okay, this is a very interesting topic, because what the sequence of events should be is that orders of the day only apply if there's an agenda that has times designated for each item in the meeting. And there should be, at the beginning of the meeting, a motion to adopt the agenda. It should be a motion made, should be seconded, and should be passed by the assembly. If it's not, then it falls in the category of the chair presents the agenda. So that indirectly, that's a decision by the chair. They didn't call for a motion to accept the agenda. So there we are. Now, if the member notices that, the agenda calls for adjournment at 9 o'clock, and it's now 9:30, stand up, call orders of the day, call to the attention of the chair, your agenda, you made a decision, or there was a motion passed to adopt the agenda, you're well over the 9 o'clock meeting. It says we are adjourned now. And the presiding officer has no choice. If there's an agenda duly enacted that has time limits on it, you must go to whatever spot the agenda says through the orders of the day. You don't have a choice. And if that means that you've gone over the time for adjournment, means adjourned.
And it cannot
Randall?
be overruled. Oh,
Yes.
Randall, I will say that we are going to, thank you for coming to our meeting. I'm going to officially adjourn the meeting, but the room will stay open for questions.
And I will, at this stage, stop the recording. Thank you very much.